Richard Pryor wasn't just a comedian, he was a groundbreaking force who transformed stand-up comedy and left a mark that's still felt today. Jerry Seinfeld once called him the Picasso of our profession, and Chris Rock described him as comedy's Rosa Parks. But behind the laughter, applause, and fame was a man whose life was filled with struggle, chaos, and deep pain. From the luxurious Southern California estate where he infamously set himself on fire during a drug-fueled breakdown to the $40 million fortune he amassed, Pryor's journey was anything but typical. But what happened to the fortune he built? Who inherited it after his death in 2005? And how did a boy raised in a brothel by his grandmother rise to become one of the most influential figures in comedy, all while fighting addiction, illness, and his own inner demons? Stay with us as we uncover the hidden truths behind Richard Pryor's abandoned home, his fortune, and the heartbreaking end of a legend who changed comedy forever. Let's get started. Raised in a brothel, Richard Pryor's early life was marked by hardship and trauma, experiences that would deeply shape his unique brand of comedy. He didn't shy away from these painful memories. Instead, he wove them into his routines, using humor to process and share the struggles he endured. Born on December 1, 1940 in Peoria, Illinois, Pryor was the son of Gertrude, who worked at times as a bookkeeper, and Leroy Jr., a boxer who drifted between jobs and served in the U.S. military. Both of his parents were involved in the brothel business run by Leroy's mother, Marie. At its peak, Marie's operation spanned 3 houses and employed several sex workers, including Pryor's own mother. From an early age, Pryor was raised in this environment. His grandmother Marie, who took on much of his care, tried to shield him from the harsh realities of life at the brothel. But despite her efforts, Pryor witnessed things no child should have to see. In his autobiography, Pryor Convictions, and Other Life Sentences, Pryor wrote candidly about those years. He recalled seeing his mother with clients at the brothel and, in one haunting memory, stumbling upon the body of a dead baby hidden in a shoebox, presumably the unwanted child of one of the women who worked for his grandmother. An abusive childhood. Richard Pryor's grandmother Marie played a memorable role in many of his legendary routines, including a well-known moment from his 1979 special Richard Pryor, Live in Concert. In it, Pryor humorously recounts the nervousness he felt when Marie sent him out to find a switch, a slender branch from a nearby tree, so she could discipline him. Growing up, Pryor was one of 4 children raised in Marie's care, and in his autobiography, he describes how strict and unforgiving she could be. The children often found themselves on the receiving end of punishment for the smallest missteps. At times, adults around Pryor would take advantage of his innocence, leading him into situations that ended badly for him. He recalled one instance when the phone rang, and it was his Uncle Dickie on the line. Dickie encouraged Pryor to shout a rude phrase at Marie. Not knowing any better, Pryor repeated it, and was met with swift punishment. Beyond the physical discipline, Pryor shared deeply personal and painful memories from his childhood. He spoke of a troubling encounter with an older boy from his neighborhood, and another instance involving inappropriate behavior from a local priest. When Pryor confided in his family about what had happened, his father and uncle shamefully tried to use the situation for their own gain, hatching a plan to take advantage of the priest. Thankfully, Marie stepped in and put a stop to it, telling Pryor to remember that even those in positions of respect and authority are still human, with their own flaws and failings. Tortured romances. Richard Pryor grew up in an environment where adult relationships were openly on display, and as a teenager he had his first intimate experience under unusual circumstances. In his memoir, Pryor Convictions, he shared that this happened with Penny, the partner of a local man named Spinks. Pryor suggested that Spinks may have orchestrated the situation by leaving him alone with Penny, who gently guided him through the encounter. During his adolescence, Pryor admitted to feeling uneasy and unsure around women. Part of that discomfort may have stemmed from a painful event in fourth grade. Pryor developed an innocent crush on a white classmate and gave her a small toy as a gift. The next day, her angry father showed up at school, using hateful language and warning Pryor to stay away from his daughter. The incident left a lasting emotional scar, shaking Pryor's confidence and shaping his views on relationships. Throughout his life, Pryor's love life was anything but simple. He married 7 times to 5 different women and fathered 7 children with 6 different partners. A tangled personal history that later complicated the question of how his estate would be divided after his passing. Racism in the Army. In 1958, eager to leave behind his life in Peoria, Richard Pryor volunteered for the U.S. Army in Chicago and was accepted. He began his training at Fort Leonard Wood in Missouri, where he learned plumbing and also received basic combat instruction. Eventually, he was stationed at an Army camp in Idar-Oberstein, Germany. At first, Pryor was thrilled by the adventure of traveling so far from home. But that excitement quickly faded as he encountered harsh racism, starting with a sergeant who used a slur during their first phone conversation, before Pryor had even set foot on the base. Life in Germany wasn't easy. In his memoir, Pryor Convictions, Pryor described the segregation he faced, noting that only a handful of bars in town welcomed black soldiers, while many places refused to serve them. He endured frequent racial insults and the constant threat of violence. The tension finally boiled over during a trip to the movies. While watching Imitation of Life, 1959, a white soldier's offensive laughter at racially charged scenes pushed Pryor and another black soldier over the edge. A fight broke out, and in the heat of the moment, Pryor claimed he pulled a small blade and injured the soldier before fleeing. The incident caught up with him. Pryor was eventually arrested by military police and spent time in jail before being discharged from the Army, marking a turbulent end to his brief military career. Performance anxiety. After his troubled time in the military, Richard Pryor set his sights on comedy, hoping it could be his way out of unemployment and hardship. Making people laugh had always come naturally to him. He often recalled his first taste of getting a laugh. As a young boy, he slipped in dog poop in front of his family. When he saw their amused reaction, he deliberately did it again, just to hear the laughter once more. Pryor struggled through school, feeling at odds with the system. His teacher stood by silently when the father of his childhood crush humiliated him at school, and he was expelled from Catholic school after word spread that his family ran a brothel. A science teacher once kicked him out of class for entertaining his classmates instead of focusing on the lesson. But not all teachers discouraged him. His drama instructor recognized Pryor's raw talent and supported him, while another teacher even gave him the chance to perform in front of the class. It was during these moments that Pryor sharpened his skills, becoming a gifted mimic who could imitate teachers, classmates, even his bullies, with ease. It wasn't long before Pryor found his way into the world of entertainment. But despite his growing success, stage fright and anxiety often shadowed him behind the scenes. Early in his career, he had the opportunity to open for the legendary Nina Simone. In her autobiography, I Put a Spell on You, Simone described helping Pryor manage his nerves before he went on stage, crashing his career. Throughout the 1960s, Richard Pryor steadily built a reputation as one of the most promising comedians of his time. In 1963, he made a bold move, leaving behind his wife and child to pursue his dreams in New York City. There, he became a familiar face on the nightclub circuit. But in those early years, Pryor's act was clean-cut and family-friendly. His biggest inspirations included television icons like Jerry Lewis, Sid Caesar, and Red Skelton, comedians whose routines he used to recite back in school. His style also followed in the footsteps of Bill Cosby, who at the time was one of the most celebrated black entertainers in America and known for steering clear of controversial topics. Pryor's star quickly rose. He became a regular on television, landing coveted spots on The Tonight Show The Ed Sullivan Show, and other major programs that brought him into millions of American homes. But as his fame grew, so did his discomfort. He began to feel disconnected from the polished, sanitized material he was performing. Under the influence of groundbreaking comedian Lenny Bruce, who spoke openly about topics like sex and social injustice, Pryor started to question everything about his act. That inner conflict came to a head in 1967 during a sold-out show in Las Vegas. Pryor walked on stage, looked out at the crowd, and said, "What the am I doing here?" before turning around and walking off. In his autobiography, Pryor Convictions, he later described the moment as a kind of nervous breakdown. His career hit a rough patch, and he found himself back at smaller venues. But when Pryor returned, he was a transformed artist. Inspired by the Black Power movement and determined to speak his truth, he wove the pain and struggles of his life into his comedy, and in doing so, changed stand-up forever. Cocaine addiction. What Richard Pryor's early audiences couldn't have guessed was that behind the laughter and groundbreaking comedy, he was quietly battling a serious drug problem for much of his career. Pryor would later speak with brutal honesty about his struggles in his routines, turning his personal demons into material that was as raw as it was funny. Though he grew up in poverty and endured a turbulent childhood, biographer Jeff Rovin, author of Richard Pryor, Black and Blue, notes that Pryor's substance use didn't begin until he moved to New York to pursue his dreams. He started with alcohol, but it wasn't long before cocaine became his drug of choice. As Pryor's fame skyrocketed, so did his access to drugs. Cocaine, in particular, became both easy to obtain and hard to resist. By 1967, while living in Hollywood, Pryor was reportedly spending hundreds of dollars a day on top-quality cocaine, supplied by a dealer he nicknamed Dirty Dick. In Pryor Convictions, he recalls how one drug-fueled night spiraled out of control. After scoring from Dick, he returned home and got into an argument with the clerk at his apartment building. In a haze, he punched the man, was arrested, and later had to pay $75,000 in a lawsuit. Sadly, this was just the beginning of many episodes where Pryor's addiction would get the better of him, leaving chaos in its wake. Early health issues. Richard Pryor wasn't alone in his heavy drinking and drug use. After all, in the wild world of 1970s show business, such habits were far from rare. But Pryor was one of the few stars whose struggles played out so publicly and with such painful consequences. In 1978, while still in his late 30s, Pryor suffered his first heart attack, a terrifying ordeal that, true to form, he later transformed into material for his stand-up. In his legendary Richard Pryor, Live-In Concert Special, he delivered the unforgettable bit Heart Attacks, where he comically acted out his own heart scolding him for his bad habits, including his love of pork. Unfortunately, that wasn't the last time his heart would give him trouble. Pryor suffered additional heart attacks in the years that followed and ultimately needed a quadruple bypass to address the damage from years of heart disease. When Pryor passed away in 2005, joining the list of comedians whose lives ended too soon, the cause of death was, fittingly and tragically, another heart attack, surviving an inferno. Despite the toll that drugs were already taking on his health, Richard Pryor continued using cocaine even after his 1978 heart attack. In 1979, he was still frequenting the home of his dealer, known as Dirty Dick, where he was introduced to a method of using cocaine that would lead to one of the darkest chapters of his life. It was there that Pryor first saw Dick freebasing, smoking pure cocaine rather than snorting it, as Pryor had done before. According to Pryor Convictions, after coming down from the high, Dick told Pryor he had seen God. Intrigued and perhaps searching for his own escape, Pryor decided to try freebasing himself. The first time he attempted it at home, the experience nearly turned tragic when he accidentally started a fire with a splash of rum. Sadly, the following year, things took an even worse turn. While freebasing again, Pryor set himself on fire. Despite his family's desperate attempts to smother the flames, Pryor ran from the house engulfed, ultimately collapsing only when police intervened. He suffered severe burns over half his body. Later, Pryor would reveal that the fire wasn't just an accident. He admitted it had been an attempt to end his life. Domestic violence played out in public. Another highly publicized incident in Richard Pryor's turbulent life took place on New Year's Day, 1978, involving a heated altercation with his third wife, Deborah, whom he had married just a year earlier. The night before, Pryor, Deborah, and two of her friends had spent New Year's Eve drinking heavily at their home. According to biographer Jim Haskins, author of Richard Pryor, A Man and His Madness, tensions flared when Pryor discovered that Deborah was romantically involved with at least one of the women visiting that night. Jeff Roven's Richard Pryor. Black and Blue offers a deeper look at what unfolded. As the argument escalated, Pryor directed his fury at the guests, and the confrontation, fueled by alcohol, dragged on for hours. When Deborah's friends finally tried to leave, Pryor chased them out of the house, but instead of letting them go, he jumped into his car and repeatedly rammed their vehicle. His anger spiraled further. He returned to the house, grabbed his .357 Magnum, and fired several shots at the car, yelling that he was stopping them from driving off. Police arrived and arrested him. This disturbing episode came just months before the passing of Pryor's grandmother, Marie, a complex figure in his life whom he still grieved deeply despite their difficult history. The incident added to Pryor's growing reputation as a brilliant but unpredictable and volatile performer, and it marked the beginning of a decline in his television and film career. As always, though, Pryor's personal chaos would eventually fuel his comedy, turning pain into unforgettable material. Living with multiple sclerosis. By 1986, Richard Pryor had reunited and was living again with his ex-wife Deborah, the same Deborah who had divorced him not long after that infamous New Year's Day in 1978, when Pryor's outburst left her friend's car wrecked and the neighborhood shaken. The two were in bed at Pryor's home in Maui, Hawaii, when he suddenly began seeing flashes of light in his vision. Soon after, he experienced numbness in his limbs and stiffness in his fingers and neck. Alarmed, they made the decision to get him to the Mayo Clinic for answers. There, after extensive testing, Pryor received the life-altering diagnosis: multiple sclerosis. He wasn't even 50 years old. In his 1995 autobiography, Pryor Convictions, Pryor wrote candidly about the emotional toll the diagnosis took on him. He admitted that the progression of the disease left him battling deep depression and even wrestling with thoughts of ending his life. Yet, true to his resilient spirit, Pryor continued to perform. He took on movie roles and kept returning to the stand-up stage, even as his health declined. In the 1990s, audiences often saw him delivering his sharp, fearless comedy from a wheelchair, including in 1999, when he was honored at the Kennedy Center with the prestigious Mark Twain Prize, who inherited Richard Pryor's money after he died. The life and long career of Richard Pryor left an unforgettable mark on the world of comedy, both on stage and on screen. From his early beginnings in the 1960s, Pryor quickly rose through the ranks, performing on iconic shows like The Ed Sullivan Show and The Merv Griffin Show. As he sharpened his comedic voice, he took his act on the road, eventually becoming a standout success in the vibrant Las Vegas scene. Pryor's comedy albums became legendary, earning him 10 Grammy nominations and taking home 5 wins. His talents as a writer extended beyond the stage. In 1974, he won a Primetime Emmy for outstanding writing on a Lily Tomlin special, and he also received a Writers Guild Award for his work co-writing Blazing Saddles with Mel Brooks, proving that his genius touched both television and film. By the time his remarkable four-decade career came to a close with his passing on December 10, 2005, Pryor had built a sizable fortune. According to Celebrity Net Worth, his films, comedy tours, and various projects amassed a respectable $40 million. And with an estate that large, it's no surprise that settling it sparked debates and controversies, almost as bold and complex as Pryor's own groundbreaking material. Pryor was married a total of 7 times. When most people pass away, it's usually their spouse and children who are tied to managing and inheriting the estate. While the probate process can often drag on due to family disputes or creditor claims and rack up significant costs, a trust is a tool that many use to avoid probate altogether, keeping things out of the courtroom and limiting legal battles. But in Richard Pryor's case, things were far from simple after his death. Pryor had been married 7 times to 5 different women, having remarried 2 of them, and was the father of 7 children with 6 different mothers. With so many potential heirs, a standard likely wouldn't have sufficed, so it made sense that Pryor set up a trust, according to the estate planning firm Morris Hall. However, even with a trust in place, Pryor's estate didn't escape conflict. A legal storm erupted between his widow, Jennifer Lee Pryor, and several of his children. While trusts are typically hard to challenge, California law does allow for certain circumstances under which a trust can be contested. When it came to light that Jennifer was named the primary beneficiary, controlling his estate, including his name, image, and royalties, tensions flared. One of Pryor's daughters, Elizabeth, raised serious accusations about both Jennifer and the trust itself. What followed was a prolonged legal battle that played out in probate court and eventually reached the California Court of Appeals. Pryor's last marriage was filed secretly. Jennifer Pryor holds the unique distinction of being both Richard Pryor's 4th and 7th wife. As Pryor's health declined, especially after his diagnosis of multiple sclerosis in 1986, his need for support grew. By 1994, he required full-time care at home, and it was Jennifer, then his ex-wife, whom he hired to oversee his team of caregivers. Around the same time, she also took on the role of his manager. By the early 2000s, however, tensions within the Pryor family were rising. Several of his children became increasingly upset, claiming that Jennifer was limiting their access to their father. His son, Richard Pryor Jr., even went so far as to petition the court for conservatorship over his father, a request the judge ultimately denied. Jennifer presented documentation proving she had power of attorney and demonstrated that Pryor was receiving proper care. But the family's legal battles were far from over. In 2001, Richard and Jennifer quietly remarried, filing their marriage certificate confidentially so it wasn't part of the public record. The couple chose not to inform Pryor's children, which made what came next all the more shocking. After Pryor's passing, his children learned that he had named Jennifer as the primary beneficiary of his trust. This revelation sparked a series of lawsuits led by his daughter Elizabeth, marking the beginning of a bitter legal fight over his estate. Pryor's widow ultimately wins in court. Elizabeth Pryor fought to have her father's earlier trust reinstated, the one that had divided his estate equally among all of his children. She argued that by the time Richard drafted his final trust, his declining health had left him vulnerable, and that Jennifer had taken advantage of his fragile physical and mental state. In her court filings, Elizabeth went so far as to accuse Jennifer of fraud and forgery on several legal documents related to the estate. Elizabeth first took her case to probate court, but the outcome wasn't in her favor. The judge ruled that as Richard Pryor's legal wife, Jennifer was entitled to the inheritance outlined in his trust. Refusing to give up, Elizabeth appealed to the California Court of Appeals, aiming to challenge the validity of her father's marriage to Jennifer by seeking an annulment. But the appeals court sided with Jennifer once again, stating that an annulment couldn't be granted because both parties needed to be alive at the time of filing, something that wasn't possible after Pryor's passing. Elizabeth also argued that Jennifer had violated California law by accepting gifts from Richard while serving as his caregiver. But on this point, too, the court ruled in Jennifer's favor, noting that the law allows an exception when the caregiver is also the person's spouse. In the end, Jennifer secured control of Richard Pryor's estate, closing the door on years of legal battles. Inside Richard Pryor's houses, inside Richard Pryor's homes, the mansions, the memories, and the price of fame. When you think of Richard Pryor, you picture a man who could light up a stage with laughter, even while carrying the weight of his own demons. But behind the curtain, beyond the sold-out shows and the roaring applause, were the places he called home. Grand estates and private retreats where his genius, struggles, and search for peace played out. Let's step inside those homes and uncover the story they tell about the man who forever changed comedy. In 1974, at the peak of his stardom, Richard Pryor purchased what would become his most famous and infamous home. Nestled on 2.2 acres in the exclusive Sherwood Forest neighborhood of Los Angeles, this mission-style mansion was a symbol of his success. The estate was everything a superstar of Pryor's magnitude could want. The main house spanned nearly 6,000 square feet, with vaulted wood-beamed ceilings, hardwood floors, and a fireplace that warmed a living room designed for both comfort and showmanship. A formal dining room opened onto the grounds, where guests could stroll out into the Southern California sunshine. The kitchen, with its handmade Mexican tile counters, gave the house a rustic charm, while the billiard room and family bar added a touch of Hollywood glamour. The primary suite offered a private terrace and a spa-like bath with dual vanities, a deep soaking tub, and an expansive glass shower, perfect for moments of quiet in a life that rarely allowed for it. But it wasn't just the interiors that dazzled. Outside, the estate unfolded like a private resort, a lagoon-style pool with a cascading waterfall, a tennis court, putting green outdoor dining spaces, and a built-in barbecue for entertaining under the stars. Separate structures dotted the grounds: a guest house, a pool house, a professional dance studio that could double as a recording space, and even a children's playhouse. There was room for 5 cars in the garage and space to park 50 more when the parties rolled in. Yet for all its beauty, this estate bore witness to some of Pryor's darkest moments. It was here, in 1980, that he set himself on fire during a harrowing night of freebasing cocaine and despair. He ran from the house engulfed in flames, a scene that would become both tabloid fodder and, years later, part of his brutally honest comedy. That house, once a palace of laughter, became a monument to the painful intersections of brilliance and self-destruction. The property changed hands many times after Pryor's passing, most recently selling for $3.6 million in 2021. Former NFL player and screenwriter Rashard Mendenhall had purchased it in 2017 for $2.5 million. But Los Angeles wasn't the only place Pryor tried to carve out a sanctuary. In the mid-1980s, after years of fame's chaos, he bought a home on the peaceful shores of Maui. The exact value of that home remains private, though properties like it typically sold for between $1 and $2 million. It was on this island, in a house surrounded by the endless Pacific and gentle trade winds, that Pryor first felt the symptoms of multiple sclerosis, a cruel twist for a man whose body had already endured so much. There, away from the glare of Hollywood, he tried to find some measure of peace with his second wife, Deborah, by his side. These homes, one a sprawling estate filled with both luxury and tragedy, the other a quiet retreat far from the spotlight, are more than just real estate. They are chapters in the story of Richard Pryor's life, places where he wrestled with his demons, celebrated his victories, and ultimately sought refuge from the storm that fame so often brought. And just like his comedy, they remind us that even behind grand facades, there is always more than meets the eye, What part of Richard Pryor's journey through fame and struggle do you find most moving? Let us know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this glimpse inside the life of a legend, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss our next deep dive into the lives behind the legends.